Is Will Cuylle in danger of being offer sheeted? We talk about why the Rangers must do everything possible to hang on to their young star.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1311 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a lot to do here today. We're going to discuss the possibility of Will Cuylle being offer sheeted by one of the other 31 teams in the NHL. A lot to say there. I will say right off the bat here, if you're worried about Will Cuylle playing elsewhere next season, I really don't see it happening. The offer sheet could happen, but I get the feeling the Rangers would match and do everything in their power to hang on to, really, probably their most promising young player that they have on the roster, in the pipeline, whatever it might be. You know, Will Cuylle has really established himself, and I think should be a priority for the Rangers going forward. But we'll talk about that. We'll also get into the World Championships. Mika Zibanejad and Juuso Parssinen playing for Sweden and Finland, respectively, both off to really nice starts there. And at the end of today's episode, we'll talk a little bit about JT Miller and his recent endorsement of Mike Sullivan as the new head coach of the New York Rangers. But we begin with Cuylle here. And I think, given the fact that this only comes up every so often, offer sheets, that is, I think it only makes sense for us to kind of go through and just give everybody the exact verbiage and hopefully an understanding of what exactly this is. And some of you might already know it, but for me, I know I always have to kind of brush up on this every offseason because it doesn't really happen all that often. Seems to be happening a little bit more recently in recent seasons, but still something of a rarity in today's NHL. Basically, what it means is a team offer sheets a player that is a restricted free agent on another team in the attempts to essentially outprice the current team for that player and get that player on their roster instead. And this is the exact verbiage that I'll read for you guys here. In the NHL, players who are restricted free agents can be, after being qualified by their current team, signed by another team to an offer sheet with salary greater than the qualifying offer. Teams have 7 days to match the offer, and if the offer is not matched, the team making the offer sheet must give up compensation. So basically what this means is that, say another team, like just say the Sharks, for example, just to throw out a random team here. The Sharks offer sheet Will Cuylle, right? They make him an offer for a certain amount of money per season, and the Rangers then have a chance to match that offer. If the Rangers match that offer, then Will Cuylle stays with the Rangers, and he doesn't get any say in the matter. He stays with the Rangers going forward. If the Rangers do not match that offer, whatever the Sharks' offer is, then they get compensation for Will Cuylle instead. The compensation depends on what the offer was from the Sharks. You get compensation in the form of draft picks, multiple draft picks, one draft pick, whatever it might be. And there's actually a chart that was released just a couple of days ago that I know a lot of you have probably seen already, but I'll pull that up in just a couple of minutes here. But to just kind of give you guys an idea of how this works, I'm going to use an example from last offseason. The Blues offer sheeted two players from the Edmonton Oilers, Philip Broberg, Dylan Holloway. They ended up getting both of those players. The Oilers got compensation as a result in the form of draft picks. But we'll go through Broberg's situation here just to kind of illustrate how this went. So Broberg, 23 years old, defenseman, former number 8 overall pick by the Oilers in 2019. He was tendered an offer sheet by the Blues for 2 years at $4.58 million per season. The Oilers had a chance to match that offer. If they did, Broberg would still be with Edmonton, but they did not. So they allowed Broberg to sign on with St. Louis at that price. And as a result of the price being $4.58 million per season, that results in the Oilers getting a second-round draft pick as compensation for losing Broberg via the offer sheet. And there's other examples as well. We had that whole back and forth between the Canadiens and the Canes a couple of years ago. The Canadiens offer sheeted Sebastian Aho, and the Canes matched the offer, so Aho remained with them. Then the next offseason, I don't know his payback or what, but the Canes offer sheeted Kokoniemi, and the Canadiens did not match the offer. So Kotkaniemi ended up going with the Canes. And the Canadiens were compensated a first and third rounder for Kotkaniemi, which seems a little steep to me, but that is what happened. But now that we've kind of got an idea of how this works and the way that it goes, hopefully I explain that as well as I possibly can. All this is to say that it doesn't happen that often. In the last 26 years, we've only seen 12 players get offer sheeted. And in that time, only 4 of them ended up playing for a different team. Only 4 different times was the offer not matched by the current team. So it is very rare for a team or for a player to leave one team in favor of another due to being offer sheeted. It just doesn't happen that often. But with all that said, I want to go ahead and kind of get back to Will Cuylle here and what this entails and what the Rangers could be looking at if a team offer sheets Will Cuylle, what they might have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up a chart here. There we go. That basically explains, for those of you on YouTube, what the compensation would be for the Rangers if Will Cuylle was offer sheeted and ended up signing elsewhere. And if you're on audio, don't worry. I'm going to talk you right through this. For the sanity of all of us, I am going to go ahead and round all of these numbers to the nearest $1,000. We're not going to worry about like $24.16 or anything like that. But this is the way that it works. If a team were to offer Will Cuylle $1.544 million or less per season, the Rangers would have the ability to match that. If Will Cuylle signed somewhere else and the Rangers did not match that, the Rangers would not get any compensation whatsoever. We don't really have to worry about that part of the chart because there's no way somebody doing an offer sheet would offer Will Cuylle such a low number when he's going to be making probably at least a decent amount more than that next season. It would just be basically a waste of anybody's time. Then you've got the next level. If he's offered between $1.544 million and $2.34 million, and the Rangers don't match that offer, then he would leave, and the Rangers would be given a third-round draft pick as compensation. Again, those numbers are too low. We move on to the next grouping, between $2.34 million and $4.68 million. If that were to happen, if Will Cuylle were to get offer sheeted at a number in that range, the Rangers didn't re-sign him, they would get a second-round draft pick as compensation. But again, these first 3 levels that we're discussing here, there's no way the Rangers would let Will Cuylle go at numbers such as this. They would happily match that offer and hang on to Will Cuylle. Then this is the one level that I think you might have to worry about a little bit if you're a Ranger fan. Because if Will Cuylle was going to get offer sheeted and the Rangers would have a decision to make, I think it would be in this range, $4.68 million to $7.02 million. That's a lot for somebody like Will Cuylle, who's only been in the NHL for 2 full seasons now. But if a team really wanted Will Cuylle, really liked what they saw, they could make an offer in that range. And if they were to do that, the Rangers would have to match that offer to make sure that they hang on to Will Cuylle. If the Rangers declined to match such an offer, then they would be entitled to a first-round draft pick as well as a third-round draft pick for Will Cuylle leaving via the qualifying offer. And again, even in this price range, I feel like the Rangers would match it. It's possible the Rangers might have to shuffle around some salary and make some moves to open up some cap space to hang on to Will Cuylle and do some of the other things that they need to do in this offseason. But the bottom line, I don't think they would let Will Cuylle get away at such a price. That is a little bit steep for Will Cuylle, between $4.68 million and $7.02 million. But I do feel like the Rangers would see the value in Will Cuylle and, see him as a big part of the future and do everything they can to hang on to him. The next level up, I can't picture a team going this high for Will Cuylle, but in theory, a team could offer Will Cuylle between $7.02 million per season and $9.36 million per season. I don't think any team is going that high. If they do, I mean, more power to them. I don't know that the Rangers could match at that kind of a price. If the Rangers did not match, they would then get a first, a second, and a third-round draft pick as compensation. And any of the levels above that, I mean, there's no way anybody's going above $9 million a year for Will Cuylle. And I have to point out, just because it's funny, the last level here, if a team were to offer Will Cuylle or any player at the price of more than $11.7 million per season, then the team that allowed him to walk as a result of that offer sheet would be entitled to 4 first-round draft picks. That is never going to happen in the history of the NHL. I just don't think there's any way possible. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where things stand as far as the Will Cuylle, price chart is concerned. It goes without saying to anybody that's an everydayer that tunes into this show more often than not, whatever it might be. You guys know I'm a big fan of Will Cuylle, and I think the Rangers will do everything possible to hang on to him. I just don't see anybody going above that fourth level there between 4.68 million and 7.02 million. And if the Rangers have to deal with a team offer sheeting him in that level, in that range of prices there, I think the Rangers would match that offer. And that, like I said, might result in the Rangers making some other moves to open up some cap space. But all this is to say that it is a little bit nerve-wracking, talking about the idea of a team offer sheeting Will Cuylle and what the Rangers might have to do to hang on to him. But if you're a big fan of Will Cuylle like I am, I would say probably fear not. I don't think there's anything really to worry about here because I just don't think the Rangers would allow it to get to that where they'd allow a team to take Will Cuylle off of their hands. But I do have a feeling that with the salary cap going up, you will see this happen a little bit more often where offer sheets become a little bit more prevalent than they've been recently. The Rangers have not been involved on either side of an offer sheet since 1997. And there's a whole documentary about that I still need to watch. It's the one about Joe Sakic. The Rangers offer sheeted Sakic when he was still on the Colorado Avalanche. And the Avs had, assuming that the time range was the same back then, they had a week to match the offer. They were able to do it. They held on to Joe Sakic. But that was a pretty wild situation that could have potentially seen Joe Sakic ending up playing with the Rangers. And the other famous Ranger offer sheet situation in team history is Adam Graves. 1991, he's on the Oilers. The Rangers offer sheeted Graves. The Oilers declined to match the offer. And you can say the rest is history because Adam Graves and the Rangers won the Stanley Cup 3 years after that in 1994. Graves is obviously a huge part of getting that job done. So, it's definitely an interesting situation, but, it's something that you can at least throw out there, but I don't see him being offer sheeted, Will Cuylle. Or I could see it happening potentially. I don't see the Rangers failing to match any offer on an offer sheet. So I think we're all good. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. We'll continue to talk about Will Cuylle throughout the offseason as well as the other Ranger free agents. But in just a second, we're going to talk about the World Championships, Mika Zibanejad, and Juuso Parssinen excelling. Rangers seem to be making the most out of this tournament. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. All right, we want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it is a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. You got the New York Knicks making a heck of a playoff run. As I'm recording this, they are up 3-1 on the Boston Celtics. You might want to get in on that while the Knicks are hot. Jalen Brunson's obviously tearing it down every single night. And it's probably about time for me to bandwagon the Knicks, as I've been doing over the last bunch of games here. But the betting on the player props and whatnot can make it that much more exciting. And if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers, as always. In our next episode, we just got done talking about Will Cuylle and the possibility of him being offer sheeted. Maybe we'll take a look around the NHL and see who the Rangers might target with an offer sheet, somebody that they could at least consider. They have limited cap space, so there's only so much they can do, but there might be some players worth considering. And somebody else on the Rangers who I think could be a possibility to be offer sheeted is K'Andre Miller. So maybe we'll discuss him as well and talk about if the Rangers would just take the compensation and let Miller walk. We've been talking about Miller a little bit off and on anyway recently, so we'll get back to that from that perspective as well. But for right now, let's talk about the World Championships. We've got a handful of Rangers participating in the tournament. We actually begin with a player who is not participating, even though a lot of us thought that he was going to. Brett Berard was slated to play for the United States. That is no longer happening. Berard pulled out due to what was described as physical limitations. It is said to be a minor issue. Berard is expected to go at the start of Rangers training camp this upcoming season. But obviously, you can understand him not participating in this tournament if he's not 100%. Only makes sense for him to get healthy, get geared up for next season. And Berard, for what it's worth, is planning on working out with Chris Kreider, Matt Rempe, and Jonathan Quick in Stamford, Connecticut at Prentice Hockey Performance. And, we'll see how that goes. Obviously, he's with a good group there. So it's an interesting group for sure. Some young guys, some older guys, and, whatever it takes to gear up for the next season, I think we're all for it. Mika Zibanejad, he is participating in the World Championships. We saw Mika score on a one-timer from the slot. There was an offensive zone face-off for Sweden, and he kind of it was on the right circle, and he moved to his left really quickly, was reaching back with his stick, anticipating the one-timer. They got the pass to him. He wound back and just cranked it. He was all fired up. And a lot of people on social media made the joke for me that Mika didn't score a goal like that all season. Now, he did score on a couple of one-timers, fewer than certainly we would have liked. But from that spot on the ice, I agree. I don't remember Mika Zibanejad a single time this season scoring right there from the slot area, and certainly not scoring from there on a one-timer. So that was nice to see, I guess. I would have preferred him to do it for the Rangers, but at least we know he is capable of doing that, and hopefully we see some of that this upcoming season. Mika also took a high stick to the mouth on Monday as Sweden was playing Finland. There was blood, but no penalty was called. He returned to the game, and Sweden now and Mika Zibanejad 3-0 in the tournament. Mika's got 3 goals in the 3 games that he's played. He had 3 in the first 2 and was held off the score sheet in the most recent one. Mika, for what it's worth, also an alternate captain for Team Sweden. We've got Will Cuylle playing for Team Canada. 3 games. He has scored 1 goal in the 3 games. I believe it was the most recent one for Canada. And there's actually World Championship games going on right now as I'm recording this during the day here on Wednesday, because obviously, the time zone change and whatnot. So some of these stats could be a little bit different by the time this episode drops. But you get the idea as far as how these guys are performing. Will Cuylle, for what it's worth, also a +1 in the tournament. And then you've got Dylan Garand. He's also playing for Canada alongside Will Cuylle. He is one of Canada's goalies, along with Marc-Andre Fleury, who I guess is retired from the NHL, but maybe not quite yet from hockey in general. Garand actually started Canada's first game. Canada easily won that game 4-0 over Slovenia. Garand had the shutout. Granted, it was only an 11-save shutout, but a shutout is nevertheless a shutout, and obviously that's good for Garand. That is his lone performance or lone appearance in the tournament thus far. Canada now 3-0 in the tournament. We've also got Juuso Parssinen. I mentioned him a little while ago. Interesting player for the Rangers going forward. He recently re-signed a 2-year deal, which I think is harmless enough, and I'm sure he'll be given an opportunity to make the team and potentially even the opening night roster for this upcoming season for the Rangers, the opening night lineup. I kind of see him as maybe like a 13th forward kind of a player, but he is young, and the Rangers clearly see something that they like in him, and very curious to see how he does this upcoming season. But he had 2 goals in Finland's first 2 games. Both of them were the game-winning goal of their respective game. One of them was actually in overtime, and it gave Finland a 4-3 win over France. They do the 3-on-3 overtime in this tournament. You had Tolvanen, who left the puck for Parssinen in the offensive zone. Parssinen picked it up, basically just went straight to the net. A couple of nifty moves right there on the doorstep, and then went backhand 5-hole for the overtime winner. So nice to see Parssinen delivering. So far, 3 games for Parssinen in the tournament, 2 goals, and is a +3 thus far. We've also got Adam Sakura. He is playing for Slovakia. He had an assist in Slovakia's 3-1 win over Slovenia. To date, he now has 2 assists, does Sakura, in the 4 games that Slovakia has played. One of them was actually a little bit earlier this morning, and Sakura did have an assist in that game. He's also a +2 at this time. Sakura is an interesting one because for somebody that was a pretty high draft pick by the Rangers, a second rounder to be exact, you don't really hear like a whole lot of buzz around him as it pertains to really just about everybody. Myself, I don't really talk about him maybe as much as I should. I don't see a whole lot of buzz about him from Ranger fans on social media. The beat reporters, they'll talk about him from time to time, of course, but you don't really see him like at or near the top of the list as far as like the prospects that fans are dying to see. I'm sure there's some fans that would like to see him at some point, but not a whole lot of buzz about him, considering that he was a former second rounder. And in fact, that year that he was drafted, the Rangers did not have a first-round pick. So he was the first player taken that year in the NHL draft by the Rangers. Now, he is still just 20 years old, and maybe that's part of the reason why there's not a ton of buzz. People just kind of assume that he's not quite there yet. And as far as like high draft picks go, I think the general consensus is that he doesn't have as high of a ceiling as other Ranger prospects, whether we're talking about guys like Othman, Perreault, maybe even Berard, even though Berard was a later, draft pick. Obviously, Will Cuylle right now is doing his thing as a second rounder. But I'll be very curious to see if Adam Sakura makes his NHL debut for the Rangers this upcoming season. It could certainly happen. It might be one of those situations where he gets the cup of coffee call up that the Rangers do every so often. We saw it with Brian Othman. He got, I think, 3 games a couple seasons ago. Will Cuylle his first taste of NHL action. He was up for only 4 games. You could see something very similar for Sikora this upcoming season. But I think it's great that he's getting to do his thing and show what he can do on a world stage, obviously representing his home country. And, for the Wolfpack last year, 71 games for Sikora, 9 goals and 21 assists. Believe he was 5th on the Wolfpack in scoring. Was not exactly a high-scoring team, but be that as it may, Sikora slowly but surely, I think, working his way to at least making his debut for the New York Rangers. Be very curious to see if it happens this upcoming season. As far as the tournament itself, I haven't followed it super closely as of now. It is on during the day. And actually, when I'm working from home, I might as well just throw the game on. I should start doing that. I think once it gets to the knockout stage is when, I'll take more interest in it. Because right now they're still in the preliminary and everybody plays 7 games. And then, the top 8 teams out of 16 make it to the knockout round. And it's single elimination from that point on. But it's always good. It's always interesting. And look, we'd rather see these Ranger players in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but there's a handful of players participating in the World Championships, given that the Rangers did not make the playoffs, and certainly something worth keeping an eye on. So we'll see how it goes. You guys let me know, those of you that have watched the World Championships thus far, how has it been? Is it exciting? Are you into it? Is it just kind of whatever? Let me know, but definitely going to be starting to watch more of that moving forward. In just a second, we're going to talk a little bit more about JT Miller with some interesting comments about Mike Sullivan and what he thinks about the new coach of the New York Rangers. And also a quick update on JT Miller's golf game. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about JT Miller and his recent, high endorsement of Mike Sullivan as the next coach of the New York Rangers. Now, on one hand, and I know a lot of people are going to point this out, what else is he going to say, right? Like if you're a player on the Rangers and you're asked by a reporter or whatever, oh man, how do you feel about the Mike Sullivan hire? You're not going to say, no, that's terrible. That's a bad idea. I mean, who would ever do that, right? But JT Miller spoke very, very highly of Mike Sullivan, and I think that kind of stood out just because, I mean, yeah, everybody's going to put on a happy face about it. And I think most of these players would like the idea of playing for Mike Sullivan, somebody that's previously won 2 Stanley Cups. But, JT seemed to really go out of his way to praise Sullivan, and got a couple of quotes from JT in a recent article on NHL.com. This is what Miller said about Sullivan during Sullivan's first go-around with the Rangers. And of course, at that time, Sullivan was an assistant coach to John Tortorella, but nevertheless, he was a coach of the New York Rangers. And JT Miller was there at the time, very young at the time. I believe Miller was 19 when he was on the Rangers, and Sullivan was there, at least initially. But this is what Miller had to say about that time. I remember when I needed a straight answer, he's the guy. It's a hard game to give those answers sometimes. He's been very straightforward with me. Now, stop and think about that for a second. JT Miller was, again, 19 years old. He's on a Ranger team that has Mike Sullivan as an assistant coach, and John Tortorella was the head coach at that time. And JT Miller, here he is saying that the guy that would give him a straight answer would be Mike Sullivan. Now, John Tortorella, I have mixed feelings at best. I certainly did not want him to be the coach of the Ranger team again this time around. But the idea that anybody would say that somebody else on the coaching staff other than Tortorella was the guy that would give it to them straight. I mean, however you feel about Tortorella, the one thing that I think we all have to give him, very straight shooter, gonna call it like it is, right? So that'll give you an idea of, just how much of a straight shooter and how real and open and honest, Mike Sullivan was with JT Miller, and very likely has continued to be, throughout his coaching career. I think that's part of, obviously, what's made him successful. The article also talks about how Miller did play for Sullivan at the Four Nations this past season. Of course, Sullivan was the head coach of that team in the United States. And Miller said, he's a great person. I think it's obviously a little looser there than it would be over an 82-game schedule, but he's a great guy. I haven't heard a single bad thing about him on the coaching front. I just have the utmost respect for him, his resume, his career, and what he has been able to accomplish. And then a little bit later, he went on to say, I'm really looking forward to working with him. I have so much respect for what he's done in this game. I think it'll be a good fit. And I think that's what we're all hoping at this point. There's no way to know for sure, but hopefully a coach that just calls it like it is, tells it to your face, straight. I mean, hopefully that's what the Rangers need. Somebody that'll give them a kick in the pants when they need it. And that's clearly something that the Rangers needed this past season. The only thing that's weird about that to me is that we all thought Peter Laviolette was that guy, right? And I think he was the first year, and I don't know what happened last year, but hopefully Mike Sullivan is that guy that'll, you know, you know, tell it like it is to this team when they need to hear it. JT Miller also went on to talk about, not being in the playoffs and whatnot. He said, I think to a man, when you don't make the playoffs, especially when you're expecting to a man, you need to play and perform better as professionals. I think that's all we're going to worry about. And yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. Obviously the Rangers are a team that had massively high expectations coming into the season, felt light years short of meeting any of those expectations, and now they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs. And the one thing that we can hope from this, whether it's JT Miller or anybody on this Ranger team, hopefully certainly the core group of players, is that they use this as motivation, and they use this to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. They learn their lesson that nothing is guaranteed. It's funny, last offseason, I remember, the Rangers season ends, they lose to the Panthers in the conference final. Panthers go on to win the Stanley Cup. There were a lot of people, from both fan bases that were already kind of booking an Eastern Conference final rematch between the Panthers and the Rangers, and certainly that was plausible. But I kept saying, man, every team needs, both these teams, the Panthers and the Rangers, they need to earn their way back to the playoffs first and foremost. Then they have to earn their way through the first two rounds. And neither team might make it there. We know the Rangers aren't going to make it. And the Panthers are currently 2-2 with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Game 5 a little bit later tonight. Definitely looking forward to watching that. But JT Miller sounds like he's ready to go to work and would run through a wall for Mike Sullivan. And that also brings me to something else I want to talk about with JT Miller. The idea of him potentially being the next New York Ranger captain. Now, this is a discussion that's going to be kind of off and on throughout the entire offseason. It already has been off and on. But, there's obviously some history there with Mike Sullivan having been together in New York all those years ago when Sullivan was an assistant. And then, of course, the Four Nations. And that's only 4 games for the United States, but they were still together during that tournament. I do wonder, who is Mike Sullivan's pick to be the next captain? We talked about on a recent episode not too long ago that I would not discount the possibility of the Rangers going without a captain for this upcoming season. We saw them do the same thing when Gerard Gallant was the coach, and now it's kind of it really is the exact same situation because Gallant got there. He doesn't know these guys. I mean, not really. And he wanted to be there for a full season, see them interact with each other, see who steps up as the leaders of the team, and then decide a captain from that. And I feel like it could be something similar with Mike Sullivan. But if he was to name a captain, I would think JT Miller would be very close to the top of his list. I've said all along, I think I've got Trocheck as the favorite. I've got JT Miller as a close number 2. I've got Adam Fox as a fairly distant number 3. I don't think Fox is at the same threshold as Trocheck and JT Miller in terms of who's most likely to be the next Ranger captain. And I just don't know that Fox is that guy that's going to, yell and scream and get the guys fired up. And that's okay. He can still be a phenomenal player throughout his career. Brian Leetch, I would have said the same thing about him, even though Leetch did eventually end up becoming the Ranger captain for a certain amount of time, a couple of seasons there before Messier came back. But yeah, I think for sure JT Miller is in the running there. And I think his relationship previously with Mike Sullivan can only help him. The other thing that I'll say about JT Miller while we're talking about him, you absolutely next season must keep him with Mika Zibanejad. There was a stat floating around on social media where Mika was actually over a point per game this past season when he lined up as a winger. And to be exact, it was 28 points in 25 games for Mika Zibanejad as a winger. But he very rarely lined up as a winger before JT Miller got to town. And it wasn't just the points. The offensive uptick was nice, but Mika Zibanejad was playing a much better brand of hockey. Wasn't perfect, but a much better brand of hockey down the stretch for this Ranger team. He got hot right around March, Mika March, right? That's always when he steps it up and really delivers. But just from a more physical standpoint, getting on the forecheck, just doing things a little bit more honestly, playing a more honest and I would say hardworking brand of hockey. Mika Zibanejad did that after he got paired with JT Miller. So, that's a different discussion for a different day. We'll kind of, maybe after free agency happens and everything settles down a little bit, we'll look at the Ranger roster and we'll kind of outline an opening night lineup for next season, from top to bottom. But the one thing I'm going to write in pen right now, I'll write it in Sharpie right now, keep JT Miller and Mika Zibanejad on the same line. I know a lot of people want Mika to be traded. Never say never, but he does have the full no-move clause, and every early indication from Mika Zibanejad seems to be that he'll use it if it does come down to that. So would I like to see Mika traded? I mean, yeah, if that situation were to present itself, I would not argue too much against that, but I think there's a very good chance he's back next season. So I'm kind of operating under that assumption. And if he's going to be here, you got to make the most out of it, and you put him with JT Miller. JT Miller golf update. So he was doing his best to qualify for the U.S. Open. And in the U.S. Open local qualifying, JT apparently shot a 76. He was 4 over par. And to be more specific, he had 5 bogeys and then had a late birdie on that course. And the graphic said that JT was tied for 38th with that score. Once again, 4 over par. And per Jeff Patterson on Twitter, who presumably knows more about golf than I do, you were not going to advance to the next, round of qualifying if you were not under par. So JT missed it by about 5 strokes. So that's unfortunate. And I'm no golf expert, but we did get a quote here from JT Miller. He said, I hit the ball really well. I had 4 3-putts and shot 4 over. So that's basically the round there. So again, no golf expert, but if you ask me, going by what JT Miller said there, it sounds like he's got to work at his putting a little bit. That might be the weakness of his game. But he even said something. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said something like that. He hopes to not even be involved in this next season because obviously if the Rangers are in the playoffs, he's not going to be out there playing golf and certainly not trying to qualify for the U.S. Open. But cool to see him at least give it a shot and, put up a respectable score at that qualifying round or whatever it's called. I do believe, we're at 1,311 episodes here. That's the most we've ever talked about golf on this podcast. So we'll end it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchik17. Once again, that is @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.